When you hear the words Al-Qaeda or Islamic State, you might automatically think terror, war, brutality. But University of Toronto political science professor Aisha Ahmad would like to add another word to that list: business. Her new book, Jihad Co, Black Markets and Islamist Power, explores how the ties with local businesses help explain why some jihadist groups succeed while others fail. And we're pleased to welcome Aisha Ahmad to our studio to learn more. It's great to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming in tonight. I'm going to start with a little excerpt from your book that'll get us off to the races. Across vast geographic, linguistic, and cultural distances, I watched as jihadist groups rose in seemingly ungovernable spaces, building powerful proto-state polities out of the rubble of civil war, fueled by monies secretly channeled from the bazaar. My research took me on a decade-long journey, from sunny seaports to rowdy arms bazaars, to uncover exactly how the war economy fueled these conflict processes. I was compelled by a key puzzle. Why are Islamists able to build such wealth and power when so many other armed groups try and fail? That's the question we're going to try to answer in our next period of time here. But tell me, where'd the idea for the book originally come from?
Well, you know, Steve, I got to tell you that the book's research took a decade, but I've been living with this story for my entire life, actually. So, you know, my family are actually from the city of Peshawar, Pakistan, which is on the border with Afghanistan. And, you know, as a child, I actually bore witness to some of the conflict processes that I then, as an adult, went on to research. You know, my own family were part of the market in that environment. They were part of the merchant class. And so what started out as the old Silk Road became, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan and then the CIA channeled arms to the Mujahideen, they became the primary smuggling network that channeled weapons and supplies to the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviet Union. And so even as a child, I witnessed the arms bazaars in the outskirts of Peshawar, the men with trucks, heavily armed trucks, showing up with crates of guns, suitcases full of cash. I mean, this was the life in the border city of Peshawar. And my family were affected by it.
You did. I mean, a decade's worth of research took you all over the place. Where did you travel?
Well, of course, Pakistan, Afghanistan. I spent time in the Somali refugee community in Kenya. I went to Somalia, Somaliland. Then in order to make sure that this process actually played out around the world, I went to Lebanon, to the Bekaa Valley along the Syrian border. I was recently in Mali, where we're continuing to do research. You know, and this journey continues. I'm heading to Iraq later this year to figure out what's happening with the smuggling networks there.
Which part of Iraq?
We're starting out in Iraqi Kurdistan, but we need to figure out where our field teams have access.
Kurdistan's an interesting place to be right now.
I know. I mean, in fact, the referendum and the Declaration of Independence affects where your flights can go, so it has tremendous effects on our logistics for this operation.
Which did you think were the most important interviews that you did for the book?
You know, some of the spectacular ones that people are always very interested in were, for example, with the Pakistani intelligence community, so the ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence Community. And those interviews were with very elite people who were in that agency, orchestrating the war both during the Soviet era, during the Civil War, and the rise of the Taliban. And so many individuals are interested in those interviews because those were people making decisions about who would get supplies, where they would move them. So I met with the late General Hamid Gul, who was the Director General of the Pakistani Intelligence Services, the late Colonel Imam, who essentially trained all of the field all the leading Mujahideen commanders, you know, how to use Stinger missiles. He was there on the ground providing logistics. General Asad Durrani, General Orakzai, these were people who were very active on the ground. But those were the elites. I think it's also really crucial to think about the people who were moving money. And so I talked to these elites in order to get their perspective of the situation, but they also pointed to the reality that on the ground there were other local hidden actors. And that's the real story of the book, which is the business class. And so I spend a lot of time talking to traders, smugglers. Sometimes the line between those two is kind of blurred.
Pretty thin?
Pretty thin. It's, you know, when there's no rule of law, it's very rich for us to talk about lawlessness. And so, I mean, traders, smugglers, big business people, CEOs, the truckers, the transporters, the head of the Coca-Cola company in Mogadishu. I mean, these are actors that have been on the ground throughout the war, and they're hustling, they're moving goods from point A to point B, and the story that they tell gives us a lens into these conflict zones like no other.
Let me do one quick follow-up before we get into the actual thesis of the book, and that is, and if this is a stereotype, you tell me, but my hunch would be that the folks who are leading these shadowy organizations, starting with the ISI and beyond, are fairly chauvinistic, conservative people. Why did they talk to a young woman?
Well, I mean, I would never have characterized them as such, but I can tell you one way I would characterize them is that they're realists to a T when it comes to their perspective of foreign policy in the world. They're strategists, they're very savvy. But you know, why did they talk to me? I was a young graduate student when I embarked on my first round of field research, and the story is quite hilarious. I went across Afghanistan on a bus, and you know, my dear father accompanied me. It was the sweetest thing, because he was like, "You cannot go alone." And then afterwards, I was visiting a bunch of think tanks in Islamabad. And one of them offered to host me to present my research. And so I presented my research to a full room, a full audience, and I had no idea that there were some leading members of the ISI present at the time. And so they asked me some questions, and I very confidently decided I would respond to them and tell them, here is how you can know, here's what I learned in Afghanistan. And these were people who orchestrated the war in Afghanistan. And I think that they found it either somewhat precocious or charming. But they were like, good job, my dear. You can come and have a chat with us. And it was from there that I actually built relationships with them, and they were very forthcoming in sharing their stories and experiences and wisdom of it.
Okay, let's get you to characterize the role that you think local business interests have played in the rise to power of jihadist groups. How would you characterize it?
Well, first and foremost, what I'll say is that the business class, when they end up in bed with Islamists, it's a marriage of convenience. And to really understand why this happens, we need to have a sense of what it means to do business in a conflict zone. So take a look at a place like Afghanistan or Somalia or Mali, where there's a tremendous amount of ethnic and tribal conflict. That means that my group and your group are killing each other, and we don't have any place to do business with each other. But what if I want to sell sugar in your district? That means that I either can't, or it's going to end up being very costly for me, because that means I need a local partner in each turf, in each ethnic or tribal turf. There's a huge amount of distrust between us. The costs of this are very, very high. And so this is both a prohibitive business environment, but at the same time, there are such tremendous opportunities. When the state fails and there is no rule of law, a lot of things become possible.
So what do you need from me and what do I need from you if we're playing out this scenario?
Well, the first thing I need to know is that you're trustworthy. And so that if I try to sell my goods in your turf and you're like, don't worry, Aisha, I've got you, you're gonna get your cut, you deliver your goods to this place and I've got you. I need to know that you're not, because you're from my rival ethnic group, that you're not gonna cheat me. Now, when there is no government to guarantee transactions, I need some kind of social currency that can allow me to build trust between me and a rival from a group that I otherwise hate.
And what is it in this case?
In this case, and in cases across the world, you see that the social capital comes from religion. So if we share a common Islamic identity, and you can demonstrate to me that you have some religious credentials, that mitigates my fear.
But as a business person, okay, maybe we should take this out from the realm of the two of us, but sure, the business people don't believe in the kind of Islam that IS represents.
This is absolutely true, but I'm not suggesting that the business people at this stage are buying into an Islamist agenda. What I'm saying is that over a long period of time, the business community does in fact lean on Islamic identity as a form of trust. So, if there is a person who, one of the heads of the Islamic Courts Union in Somalia told me that, look, if there's a person who's chewing khat, smoking cigarettes, looks like he's, barely sober for that moment, And then there's another person in a stall next to them who has a clean beard, who looks like they're a very religious person. Who do you think is going to cheat you?
Yeah.
And so this information shortcut plays out over time, and the business community ends up adopting this Islamic identity, both to build trust across factional lines and also to secure business deals that they otherwise wouldn't.
Okay, conversely, the Islamic State warriors certainly have no interest in the kind of lifestyle that the business people are leading. So what's in it for them?
See, now that's the second part of the story. Now, what I'm saying in terms of the Islamicization of the business community, that happens long before the Islamists actually show up on the scene. And so the idea that the business class are going to try to present themselves as having some sort of Islamic identity happens long before any jihadists show up and try to tap into that social capital. But this is how the jihadists do tap into it in such a way that gives them an opportunity. And it's highly strategic. Now, as I mentioned, if I'm from one ethnic group and you're from another, the taxes that I end up paying just to do business get really, really high. Because in an ethnically or tribally fragmented civil war, all of the protection rackets, all of the security arrangements are run by warlords who are representing their sub-state group. They're representing the Pashtuns, they're representing the Tajiks, they're representing the Hawiya. And so I can buy protection from my group, but if I want to sell into another, I got to buy double protection, have a partner there. That gets expensive. Here's where the Islamists can come in and offer a one simple, single-payer tax system across factional lines. So they show up, newcomers on the scene, with a business community that's sort of been massaged already with its Islamic identity, and they say, look, we're all Muslims here. Instead of you buying from a Pashtun or a Tajik or a Hawiya or a Darod protection racket, all of you can buy into our protection racket. And you know what's amazing about that? Wider pool, lower margins. They can actually offer a lower tax rate for security than their rivals.
So simpler and a better business case.
It's a better deal. They charge less, they earn more, and you know the only thing that their rival ethnic warlords can do is start to increase their taxes of their own base in order to keep up, which just pisses everyone off more. And then they price themselves right out of the market. It's like the big box chain that removes these, you know, mom and pop warlords from the game.
I don't want to push this comparison too far, but do you see any historical parallels here between this and the formation of early European states?
You know, there are parallels that are important because the early European states that emerged were very much protection rackets as well. They forcibly coerced taxation in exchange for security, and that was order making. But here's the key difference. We don't allow that kind of state making in the world today. Since 1945, we've decided that borders are fixed, they are inviolable, we do not allow for interstate wars at that level. The way European states were built at that time, that era is over. There are no more Ivan the Terribles and Catherine the Greats to create states as they were created before. That was a very bloody process. And so while these patterns are similar, the outcomes are not going to be achieved.
Tell me this, you started off by saying that much of this started back in 1979 with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and that you weren't alive yet when that happened.
No, I wasn't.
But that certainly set the pace for what you ended up studying. But the whole Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, in part, was about making Afghanistan much less religious and much more Soviet. And yet business at that time, you tell us, became increasingly Islamic. How did that happen?
So this is, you know, I really think the birthplace of what has become a modern jihadist global movement. And it started out during that Soviet invasion that came with secular communist ideas that were tremendously foreign to the Afghan population. Now, when the Mujahideen rose up against the Soviets, they did so as Mujahideen, as people fighting jihad, a holy war against godless communism. And when the Americans backed them, they did so with weapons and cash resources. Now, think about, at that time, the Soviets were aware that there was a Cold War happening and it was being channeled through the Pakistani border regions. And so their KGB equivalent, the Jihad, the intelligence services run out of the Afghan government that was a Soviet proxy at the time, were hunting people who they thought could be spies for the, for the Mujahideen or participants in that. And so there was this fear that of this godless communist Soviet infiltrator, and Islamic identity actually became a currency for building trust at that time as well. There was even a joke that you can tell a communist because they're too lazy to wake up at Fajr to pray. What does that tell you? That in order to demonstrate that you are in fact on the side of the Mujahideen, you need to demonstrate your religious credentials. You need to demonstrate your trustworthiness, not just to the Mujahideen, not just to other business people, but also to the ISI who are pulling the strings on who's going to get those deliveries.
Let's talk about the jihadist cell here, and by that I don't mean C-E-L-L, but S-E-L-L, because many understand the rise to power of groups such as ISIS and, well, they think it's ideological, not economic, and you've given us a new angle on this to think about. Why don't you think that the allure of ideology and the sort of intoxicating promise to return to the golden age, make Islam great again, if I can steal a phrase here, why does that not explain their rise to power?
Well, they certainly dress it up in that language. But rhetoric alone cannot buy you the bullets that you need, cannot give you the cash resources that are necessary to pay your fighters to win a war. And so all of them dress it up in that language. And so many analysts are distracted by it, by the heated rhetoric and by the sort of flamboyant talk. But at the end of the day, you need to have resources and supplies to pay for your rise to power. And you mentioned ISIS in Iraq, and some of my colleagues who have spent a lot of time in Mosul, also working the smuggling networks, working on researching the smuggling networks along the Iraqi and Iraqi Kurdistan border, will tell you that the business class in Mosul before the rise to power of ISIS were absolutely fed up. The then Maliki government that had given preferential treatment to the Shia, not only had he created a difficult business environment for them, but his people were also illegally taxing or forcing bribes or whatever you want to call it, of the business class at that point, and they were fed up. In Syria, it was a similar story where people were fed up with the groups that were either affiliated with or even the other rebels that were fighting against Assad. You had to pay every 5 blocks, right? And so they're looking for an alternative. And the predecessors to Daesh, the predecessors to ISIS, they had set the stage, the jihadists in Mosul, building those relationships with the organized criminal networks, seeding those relationships, and then came the moment where they could say, look, you buy into our protection racket, we get rid of all of these guys.
So I'm sensing an inevitability about this. I mean, the pattern that you say started 30 years ago with Afghanistan and Somalia has now morphed into Iraq and Syria. This was inevitable, I guess.
I don't want to say it's inevitable. What I want to say is that there's a learning curve, and that we should be very aware of the fact that jihadists do pay attention to what's happening in other theaters around the world, and they learn from the mistakes of their rivals. That's even in the sense of how they organize themselves. So if you look at, in the case of Pakistan, the TTP was organized along tribal lines, and every time there was
TTP stands for?
Sorry, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan.
Okay.
So the Pakistani Taliban was organized along tribal lines, prone to tremendous levels of fragmentation. Other jihadists noticed that, and you know what? They started shuffling their commanders to make sure that they broke down those tribal organizations within their ranks so that when there's leadership decapitation, you don't get splintering. They watch each other, they learn from each other, and they signal to each other. And so there was learning in how you can actually leverage informal economies, not only to rise to power, but to stay in the game in the long run.
So we've talked Afghanistan, we've talked Syria, we've talked Iraq. We should talk a bit about Somalia here.
Absolutely.
Same pattern happening there?
Well, in Somalia, actually, we had the entire emergence of jihadism in Somalia happened as a result of not only this very same phenomenon that occurred in Somalia, but also the completely failed reaction of the international community in dealing with it. So in 2006, we saw the emergence of a movement called the Islamic Courts Union, within which Al-Shabaab, which we now know is the jihadist terrorist group that's affiliated with Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab were the foot soldiers of the Islamic Courts Union that were mobilized to defend this political movement. But the Islamic Courts Union, it came to power very rapidly in 2006 and ousted the warlords that had been holding power for over 15 years. And what they did was consolidate tribes across the spectrum into one movement under the banner of Islam, and they had the explicit backing of the Mogadishu business community. 70% of the Mogadishu business community threw their support behind the Islamic Courts Union, primarily because they were fed up of the tax rates that they were paying under their rival tribal warlords.
So they voted with their money, basically.
They completely voted with their money. And, you know, the head of one of the biggest business associations in Mogadishu explained this to me very succinctly. He said, Aisha, for every $100 we were paying to the warlords, we could give the Islamic courts $35 to remove them. And so they did.
Basic business decision.
Business decision, and they did so thinking that they could consolidate power, pay one time, and it would be done. Now, the international community saw this as, okay, this is Taliban 2.0 in East Africa. You know, overthrew them, reinstalled the warlords from the pre-Islamic courts era, and then al-Shabaab emerged as it is now in response to that.
Let's go big picture here, and I wonder if you could tell me whether you think this new relationship between business and Islamism is kind of the foundation for a new type of country, proto-state, whatever you, what's the term that you international relations folks use?
Well, proto-state would be right because they meet many but not all of the necessary attributes of statehood, but they are definitely in the game of order making. So when you have this marriage of convenience between the business class and the Islamists, it creates a social contract, a protection and extortion contract that's very similar to what we understand a state to be. We pay taxes so that we can live in a state, and the government offers in exchange for that security and law and order. That is the most rudimentary understanding of a state. Now here's the problem. We can't accept these kinds of states because ideologically,
we who?
The international community will not accept these kinds of proto-states because ideologically there are many questions about whether or not they are abhorrent. Now in the case of the Islamic Courts Union, this was a tremendous lost opportunity on the part of the international community, a misdiagnosis based on botched intelligence that resulted in an invasion that's resulted in so much catastrophe. But especially where Islamists challenge borders, our international laws do not permit these sorts of polities to emerge. Even still, I would say that as social scientists, the process that we are witnessing is order making in a way that does have parallels to state formation. The problem is the states aren't ones that the international community will accept.
Well, that's my follow-up. So what do we do? What do we in the West do about this when clearly we want to defeat the terrorists who are one part of this equation? We don't necessarily have a problem with the business people on the other side of the equation, but they have a symbiotic relationship now that we're, I guess, trying to get in the middle of. So what do we do?
Well, there are a couple of things that we can learn from this. First and foremost, I'll say once again that these business people are pragmatists, not ideologues.
So we got to make them a better deal.
We absolutely need to consider the kind of deal we're currently giving them. And so right now, security specialists tend to look at terrorism and corruption as two completely separate and unrelated problems. They are in no way unrelated. They absolutely are a point of connection in that the greater the amount of corruption, the worse people are, the more people are paying out to these institutions of corruption. So when we as the international community build corrupt governments and institutions that undermine a business environment, that create biases that favor one group over another, there is a direct relationship between that and support for jihadist groups that can then pitch themselves as making a better deal. There was a study in 2010 that was done in Afghanistan in which support for the Taliban was directly correlated to perceptions of corruption in the government and exclusion. And so what we can see is that the business community, their votes, when you said they're voting with their dollar, their votes are up for grabs, but we also don't really consider how we are affecting those votes, how we are encouraging buy-in.
Tell me more specifically then, what do we have to have on offer in order to be competitive when it comes to this relationship?
Well, where we don't have the opportunity is on the social capital side. Right. I mean, it's so difficult to build a sense of national identity, especially a secular national identity that can establish that trust between groups that have deep, deep hatreds. It's a tremendous challenge to build that. So Islamists have a competitive advantage on that front. Mm-hmm. But really, at the end of the day, the immediate cost calculations of the business class will be on the basis of who they're paying out to. And what we can pay attention to is whether or not those groups that we empower are fleecing local communities. And so the amount of investment we put into anti-corruption activities, the requirements that the international community has on, our support being tied to controlling corruption, these are crucial international security questions. This isn't just a secondary or tertiary effect that we can't control. This is the problem. Corruption is the problem that drives these conflict processes, and that's where we have some leverage and some advantage in reining that in. Also, what I'll say is that this is morphing. So another place that international security experts need to pay attention is that after jihadists are pushed out of territory, this relationship between business and jihad, it persists, but in a different way, and we need to pay attention to that as well. So as ISIS loses territory in Mosul, in Raqqa, in other key strongholds where it was controlling its smuggling networks, right now they're starting to engage in money laundering, taking the mass cash resources that they accrued when they were able to tax and extort their populations, and now investing that into what would otherwise seem to be legitimate businesses in the hopes that they can wash it and hold on to those resources so that they can fight the long fight. And that relationship between business and long-term insurgency is something that the international community should be definitely aware of, that when they lose mass territory and resources, jihadists tighten their belt and start engaging in some of the more spectacular, cheap and easy, soft targeting terrorist attacks and bear down for that long fight.
Absolutely fascinating. Aisha, it's so good of you to join us here on TVO tonight. She is the author of Jihad Co, Black Markets and Islamist Power. Thanks so much for coming into TVO tonight.
It's been a pleasure.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.